Now, let's examine what Luther and Calvin actually wrote that demonstrates they largely took the first approach in relation to the early fathers, thinking they knew better than the fathers, when they couldn't appropriate an out-of-context quote for their cause, or couldn't question the authenticity of certain writings. I have to give Joe Heschmeyer credit for getting me started on sources and citations for this purpose, though I did double-check his citations against the primary sources and discover even more citations beyond what he provided. In his video, Why the Catholic Mass is Essential to Christianity and Completely Biblical, which was basically his opening statement for his James White debate, Joe gives us a quote showing Luther recognized that the early Holy Fathers held the Catholic position on the Mass as a sacrifice offered to God. Unfortunately, he left out the next sentence, which makes it clear that Luther thought he knew the words and example of Christ better than the early fathers, and thought it necessary to oppose the fathers. And not just on this issue, as we'll see later, but generally. Now, I can understand why Joe left this out, since he had a different goal in mind than I do here. But also, unfortunately, Joe apparently had the wrong citation in his video. So this quote is not from Luther's work on the bondage of the will, but rather from on the Babylonish captivity of the church in the section concerning the Lord's Supper, which Luther wrote in 1520, fairly early on in his break from the church. 5 years later, speaking to Erasmus, Luther says the authority of the fathers should be thought of as nothing, not even giving them any due honor or authority. And again, we see him implicitly but clearly claiming to know Christ and the Word of God better than the early fathers, pitting Christ against them. Toward the end of his life, Martin Luther wrote a commentary on Genesis in which he compares himself to Noah and all the fathers to the wicked who taunted and mocked Noah and were drowned in the great flood. Clearly, Luther was getting the same kinds of questions that I've been asking Protestants, and he pridefully shrugs off the powerful questions by merely comparing himself to Noah, rather than engaging the questions, even though he himself admits that it is hard to believe that he knows better than all the fathers.